Mr. Secretary, can a recession in the U.S. still be avoided, or is it now the most likely outcome?
Look, I think we're taking this one day at a time, and anyone who predicts with certainty exactly where this is going or how far is going beyond what we know. Clearly, we're headed in a negative direction in terms of the economy. When it was a problem in other countries, we were seeing supply chain interruptions, which were going to slow the economy. We're now seeing massive numbers of people not going to work and businesses closing. That's going to be a drag on the economy, and it's going to have an effect on demand. So we know the direction is a slowing economy. Where it's going, we just have to see how the health issues are resolved. Fundamentally, this didn't start out as an economic problem. It started out as a health problem. And we need to get ahead of that. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get resources to the health professionals and the providers of services who are going to make the difference as to whether we can control the spread of this virus. And we need to make sure that people who are unable to work, particularly people who don't have their wages being covered, have the resources to buy food and take care of their families. It's both a humanitarian issue, but it's also an economic issue because cumulatively that's a lot of demand. So I think there's a need for some immediate action on what's happening right now. I think we have a little bit more time in terms of where the next step is in terms of the economy. I have thoughts as to what could be prudently done to prepare for it, but I think it's too early to predict with any certainty exactly how far it's going.
We'll come to the policy actions you recommend in just a moment, if that's okay, Mr. Secretary. You were at Citi at the peak of the financial crisis. Do you think that there is a 2008 financial crisis feel to the markets at the moment?
I think this is very different than the financial crisis. If you look at the health of our financial institutions, as a result of the actions taken after the financial crisis, our financial institutions are far better capitalized, they have much more resilience, and we have much more visibility into what's going on. So there are risks out there on the horizon, but this is not at the moment something that looks like a financial crisis. That doesn't mean that the market moves are a comforting thing. It reflects deep anxiety, but it's anxiety about what's going on in terms of the response to the health crisis. And it's anxiety that's driven by we don't know how long it is or what the long-term macroeconomic consequences will be. We know they're negative, but we don't know how far they're going. If we can turn the corner on the health crisis and see where the economy is going, I think we still have the ability to manage this. But we all know that time is of the essence. I was very discouraged to hear that the Senate went home this afternoon for the weekend. It would have been a good thing to take some action to deal with some of the immediate needs on the health side and in terms of the needs of people whose paychecks are not going to be showing up in the next weeks.
Well, then what kind of action do you suggest?
Well, in the short term, I think the two top priorities, number one is health. Are we giving the healthcare providers the resources they need to get the equipment they need, to get the supplies they need, so that people can be tested, treated, separated from the community, and we can control the spread of the virus? We haven't done a great job so far. Hopefully, we're turning the corner now. Resources were made available in the supplemental appropriation. I think we need to do more. We need to support the local governments that are the first responders. If you look at a community that's shut down, there's going to be a need to provide for the needs of people who can't come and go normally. And that's something that most state and local governments need support on. And if you're a family that's living on an hourly wage and your main earners are not getting their hourly wages on a daily basis, there's not a lot of financial reserves in those households. They need immediate help in the form of assistance like, SNAP, food stamps, and they need unemployment benefits. They need to get a quick response. If we wait on that, it's going to have both economic and humanitarian consequences. I was pleased yesterday that the House, through the leadership of Speaker Pelosi, put a package together. I was also pleased to see that there were conversations going on last night and through the day today between the Speaker of the House and the Secretary of the Treasury to try and work something out. The time to get something worked out on those two areas is now. This won't be the only time that Congress has to deal with it. It won't be the only time the administration has to deal with it. But you can't put off those first two steps. As we understand the shape of the economic reaction, we'll know what's needed. And, if we could put some things in place with triggers so that they would take effect when needed and we didn't have a long delay, it would be better. But that's not a today issue. But it should be sooner rather than later.
Mr. Secretary, in your assessment of the political environment at the moment, do you think things will get worse before we get the type of action that could help things turn around? I mean, I'm reminded, of course, of the peak of the financial crisis, the first time the TARP measures failed to pass and, of course, led to more turmoil in the short term. Do you think we're still in that environment where there's not quite the political will because there's an election year and things are very polarized to get things done in the short term?
I think if you remember back to 2008, we had an unusual moment in a presidential campaign where the Democratic nominee took a very unpopular position to help the Republican president and the Congress work through and come up with a plan to stop the damage that was going on in the economy. I think this is a moment like that where, frankly, the burden is going to fall to Congress, but you're going to need to see all parties looking for ways to find reasonable compromises to agree. You can't get everything done, but there are things that everyone should be able to agree on. The kinds of things that I ticked off, including helping states pay their Medicaid bills, which without that, they're going to not have the resources to meet all the health care needs they have. These are things that people have agreed on with Republican and Democratic presidents and with Republican and Democratic Congresses. So, I think the moment is now. I don't think we ought to wait until we are in a position where we say we lost the 10 days when we could have maybe stopped the spread of this so that it wouldn't come beyond the means of our hospitals to deal with it.
The action we saw from the Fed today really influences the credit markets here. They're trying to make sure that access to credit, access to liquidity does not freeze up. Is it time for the Fed to take another action to change its strategy? We saw the Bank of England pledge to lend directly to small businesses. Is that something that the Federal Reserve should consider?
So, look, the Federal Reserve has different authorities than the Bank of England. I think the Federal Reserve has taken a number of actions responding to the macro conditions as they develop. But I think those actions are being taken cognizant of the fact that you're not going to solve a supply problem by stimulating demand. And so the rate cut from last week isn't going to create a supply of parts that's been cut off. And people aren't going to go out and resume normal activity if there's another monetary policy action. Fundamentally, we need to turn the corner on the health situation. I actually think that some of the things we need to do, the kinds of things that I described as the immediate response, will help a lot of small businesses and families in the interim. I think it is incumbent on policymakers to look at fiscal tools very carefully and to target them where the need is greatest. I've been concerned by proposals that would have huge amounts of money go to businesses in an untargeted way. We've had an enormous tax cut in this country. Businesses went into this very strong. I think we need to wait and see where the real need is. And the kind of thing that some people have been talking about in terms of giving the SBA the ability to make interest-free loans to small businesses, those are the businesses that will be the first to fail. We have to be careful not to just provide relief to over-leveraged businesses that got into trouble not because of the virus, but because of their own business. And it's hard to thread that needle. I think after the last response to the financial crisis, it's really important that we show that we're responding to virus-caused problems, not to other things.
Mr. Secretary, you mentioned how we saw the TARP bill and others come together in the financial crisis, and it, of course, came in an election year. Should Vice President Biden and Senator Sanders come together and meet with President Trump at this time?
I'm not sure what meeting makes sense. I listened to the president yesterday evening. I listened to Senator Biden, Vice President Biden, this afternoon. I think it was a striking contrast in terms of presentation. I think we need to reinstill confidence that we're dealing with this responsibly at the highest levels of government and all the way through. Right? We haven't seen that over the last few weeks. We haven't seen it from the White House, and it, as I say, it disturbed me that the Senate went home without acting this week. We need to see our government come together and do the things that people can agree to do to deal with the immediate problems and start a conversation about some of the longer-term measures. What format that meeting takes, I can't say. It's a different environment in Washington than I ever experienced.
Mr. Secretary, just one final question, if we may. I totally get all of the points you've made about helping those people that will need the help most if they're out of work, or the companies that are smaller and really feeling the pressure in a targeted way. What about targeting some of the bigger companies that are feeling the pressure, like a Boeing or an Occidental Petroleum or some of the larger airlines who may well, through issues over the last couple of years, have taken on too much debt and have some blame to face themselves? Should they be bailed out if necessary? Or is this such an impossible scenario that they're not to blame and the government should stand behind them?
I think we need to be very careful. We need to make sure we know what we're doing before we do it. Just yesterday, I saw that Boeing drew down all of the lines of credit that it had available, so it has liquidity for the moment. We don't know what each of the company balance sheets look like. I think there's a danger of people looking back and saying, that we did things that will look more like a bailout. And it's not coming at a neutral time. It's coming after 3 years of massive tax relief, where companies have had the ability to build up cash and do very well. So they should be prepared to deal with some setback. I don't think we should say never. I think, I was part of the administration that's proud to have saved the auto industry in America. But that was an extraordinary situation, and I don't think you should start right now thinking that this is a situation where that's the first response. Let's do first things first. Let's deal with the most vulnerable. Let's deal with the immediate health crisis. Let's deal with the small businesses that don't have the capacity to help themselves. And let's take a deep breath and see where things are going before we take those other steps.
Former Treasury Secretary Jack Lew, thank you, sir.
Good to be with you.